Hi, and welcome to another edition of Guitar Tone from Behind the Tone. Today we're going to talk about the importance of preamp tubes. In an amp, here's the most basic amp right here that I want to use today as an illustration. This is just basically a one-channel amp, just meat and potatoes. I'm going to flip it around here for you. Basically what we have here is we have some EL84s for the power section. This is actually a 20-watt amp, and this is what you call the tube rectifier. So these two tubes we're not going to be dealing with today. What we're going to be dealing with is our preamp tubes and the importance that they make on your tone. Now the first preamp tube here in the lineup is called the V1. And that's the one that is going to be closest to your input. If you look here on the back of this amp, you can see that the input comes in and it goes right to V1. So that one is going to be your most important tube for your tone. So if everybody's always saying V1 is the most important preamp tube, it's because it's the one that comes right from your guitar and really shapes the tone. Now on this amp, you can see there's only 3 preamp tubes. The middle one here is going to be for the effects loop, so it doesn't really matter just as long as it's working, it doesn't really affect the tone that much. The last tube, the phase inverter, might not shape the tone as much as V1, but it definitely has a lot to do with the tone. Some people even think it has more important role in your tone than even V1, because the phase inverter is the last tube before it goes to the power section and to your speakers. Basically, in a 12AX7 preamp tube, there's 2 sides of the tube called triodes, and they both work. There are 2 tubes in one. So what happens, this is what I use in for the phase inverter, and this is by Groove Tubes, and this is where I've found to be the best tube for the phase inverter. And what it is called an MPI, or matched phase inverter. And so what happens here is that Groove Tubes tests these tubes and make sure that both sides of both triodes are working at the same rate, and that will give you a real smooth tone. Okay, as you can see, I have a lot of these phase inverter tubes. I feel that the Groove Tube match phase inverter tube is really the best bet for your phase inverter. They're a little pricey, they're like 20 bucks each, but I feel like they're worth it. I always have a good stack of these on hand. You can get these JJ tubes for like 10 bucks, and I do have a bunch of these just for reverbs and effects loops, and sometimes I use them in V1 depending how good they are. Here you can see I tested these on my tube tester, and see some of the numbers I got here. 70, 60, 60, 74, 90, 85. That's a pretty strong one. So some of these, depending on the strength of them, will work good in V1. You just have to pop them in there and see how they sound. Now you can see here, this is a basic tube tester here. This is called a Simpson 555. It's a really old one, but it works good. Basically on this one, my numbers go from 0 to 100, and 50 being in the middle of the road, and you know, then up above that would be good, and down below that would be bad. And you can see here I got one of my matched phase inverter tubes there, and when I pop it on, I get a reading of about 90 on triad 1, and I'll pop it on for triad 2, and it's right there at 90. So you can see that how dead on that is. Now we'll put in one of these just regular JJs. This is straight out of the box, brand new. So you can see that it's It's not like an old tube or used tube. This is straight from the box. We'll pop this in here and let it warm up for a second. And we'll see what kind of reading we get off this. According to my last reading, I got a reading of 5682. So we'll try triad 1, and yeah, that must be, it goes up, then it comes down, and it's about 56. And then triad 2 is very strong, about 90. So you can see the difference there in this tube. Now this tube it's good, but it's not matched. So that will give you a little bit of a bad tone if you use that in a phase inverter. That's why you can't really just pop in any old tube in the phase inverter. You really have to know that that tube is matched to get the best tone possible. I have a lot of theories about tubes, and one of them is I feel that the different companies, like, let me throw in a Mesa here. You can see I have a lot of different tubes here. These are my tubes that I use for V8, V1 a lot. Here I have, like, up on the top row, I've got these Groove Tube R2s, which are pretty nice. They come from Russia, and they're a pretty good tube. I really like them. I've had some good success with them. Here is, these are my favorite tubes. And this is a Hungarian tube called an RHT, I believe it is. And there you can see that the sign they have. This is a very nice tube. It's one of my favorite. I get these for about 25 bucks on eBay. And they're used but tested. And sometimes you can get them new for like 30 or 40 bucks. These are very good tubes too. Here we have Telefunken. And these are pricey. Sometimes new, these can go up to 100 bucks each. These I got for about, I think I bought 4 for 160. So I got them for about 40 bucks each, which is a pretty good deal. And they sound very, very nice. Very smooth, and they're a real vintage tube. I have some stronger JJs here that I tested, and they came out real strong. And I have those for V1s. And here I want to show you, though, like, my theory on tubes is, like, this is a Mesa tube. Let's go over to the tube tester and pop this baby in. But my theory is that some of the big companies like Mesa, they go over to the tube plants and they hand pick their tubes, and they get the cream of the crop. And there's other companies that probably do the same. But you can see that this tube here is an old Mesa tube that I've had for a long time, and it's very, very strong and very, very well matched, just right out of the gun. And it's not a matched phase inverter tube at all, but it's just that I think Mesa can go over there and hand pick their tubes and only sell the tubes that they like and that will sound good in their amps. And that's why the you know, I think buying tubes is a real art. And sometimes, like recently, I bought some tubes, like just a lot of 10 from a company which I won't name. But a lot of them came back and they were, you know, way different readings. Some of them reading even in the bad, right out of the gun. I sent those back. Other companies like, you know, the Tube Store and the Tube Depot, these different companies, they test their tubes first before they sell them, which really helps. Okay, so that's just to give you a little rundown on tubes. Now let's pop a few of these tubes in V1 just to show you some different tones you get. Now, one thing I wanted to say too about V1 is that not only is it going to be sound that you hear, but it's also going to be a feel, like the feel of how it feels when you're playing it. Some tubes are real gritty and, you know, gristly, and that's like the Mesas. They're kind of gristly and gritty, whereas some tubes are very smooth, and it depends on the kind of player you are. So let's pop a few tubes in V1 and see how they sound. Okay, so we're gonna pop a few different tubes in V1 and see if we can hear. Like on the camera, you're probably not gonna hear much difference, but it just kind of give you an idea of how to do it and how to find the tone with these V1s. So what I'll do is I'll just get a loop going here with now we got a basic little loop going here, and we'll just turn the amp, this right here, we'll turn the amp off now and put it on standby. You cannot do this with the power tubes, but this is okay with the preamp tubes. So you can see I got one of those Hungarian tubes in there now. But let's throw a little Mesa in here and see how that sounds. Let it heat up for a second, and we'll turn it back on. Sounds okay, pretty smooth. Like again, you won't be able to hear much subtle difference on this camera, but I'm just showing you how exactly you can test different tubes and come up with one that you really like. And you know, this is a very clean tone that this amp gives. So, you know, maybe you're going to want to try to find a more grittier, you know, distortion amps. This is a Telefunken. That one sounds very good, very full. Here is a gold pin JJ. These go for about 15 bucks. And I've done this before where, you know, with different amps where I've been swapping tubes in and out to try to get the tone that I wanted. And this is probably besides changing the transformers, a lot of guys change out the transformers for Mercury transformers. This is the next step. The transformers have a big impact on the tone, and the next would be the tubes. That's the JJ. It sounds pretty good too. Nothing like that Telefunken though. Okay, let's move on. Okay, we went over the basic functions of this basic 20-watt amp in the preamp section. The importance of V1 and the phase inverter. And this is the basic setup of most clean amps, one-channel amps such as early Fenders, etc. But as time went on, people wanted more distortion from their amps. And JCM 800 was the one who started the ball rolling, putting more gain stages in them. You can see from the chart that some of how many gain stages are in basic amps, such as the Mesa Boogie. And here's a little chart that shows what the tube assignments are on that Mesa Boogie. And from this chart you can see that the amp with the most gain stages is the 5150. Let's take a closer look at some of these tubes in these amps and what they do. Okay, here is a Marshall JCM 800 50 watt. Here's your 50 watt power tubes. And here are your 3 preamp tubes. This is a very straightforward amp. No effects loop, no reverb, just your meat and potatoes. This is a 1982. This preamp here is very famous. Great sounding preamp. And Mesas and Soldanos actually copied this preamp and just added more gain stages. This amp has 3 gain stages. This is your phase inverter tube. So here's your 2 gain stage tubes. There's one stage before the EQ, the master, you know, you have your input comes in, and then the first gain stage, then it goes to the bass, middle, and treble, the EQ section, and then it comes and has 2 more EQ sections, then to the phase inverter, out to the speakers. Very straightforward. A lot of people use this amp, and I have another video on the JCM 800 you can see for more information on that. Alright, here's a JCM 800, but this is a 1986, and this one has a effects loop and a reverb. So basically you have your V1 here, which has your first gain stage, your second gain stage, and your third and fourth gain stage, and then you have a tube for the effects loop or the reverb, not sure which one, and this is the effects loop or the reverb, and then your phase inverter. So this is almost the exact same amp as the other one, which has 3 tubes, but has 5 tubes, one for the effects loop and one for the reverb. This is a combo. Here's a look at the back of a Mesa dual rectifier. Sorry about all the wires, I just don't feel like unhooking all these wires, if you know what I mean. Anyways, the Mesa Boogie, like mentioned before, is based on a JCM 800 preamp, the first stage, and then it goes through the EQ section, and then they have 4 stages of gain after that, so a total of 5. Like I mentioned, the PV has got 6 stages of gain. This has got 5 stages of gain. One thing I didn't like about the rectifier, this is actually one of my favorite amps, but you do need to tweak a lot these preamp tubes back here, and it's so hard to get to them. You actually have to pull the power tubes out to get to the preamp tubes. You can see I got my 4 power tubes there, and here's the rectifier tubes. I put in some groove tubes, rectifier tubes. I like the rectifier. That becomes a tube rectifier. It's very spongy and rubbery and very good for leads. The rectifier actually has an option here where you can switch it from silicon diodes rectifier or tube. I usually keep it on the tube. Sometimes for the metal guys, I like to switch it over to the silicon tubes. Anyways, that's a look at a dual rectifier. Alright, here's a PV5150, and this is a real interesting amp. It has the most gain stages of any amp that I know of. It has 6 gain stages. It's really interesting. On the top you got your 4 power tubes. It's a 100-watt amp, and then there's no preamp tubes on the top. You can see it's signed by Eddie Van Halen here. But in the back they have a little plate you remove, and there is your 5 power tubes. Basically the same as usual. V1 is your first most important tube, first gain stage. Then it goes to the volume, and then the next stage is back to V1 for stage 2, stage 3, stage 4, stage 5, stage 6. And then you have your phase inverter tube going out to your output transformer, and the 4th tube is the effects loop. Here's one of the most straightforward little amps that I've ever encountered. It's a Fender Champ 12, made in the late 80s, early 90s, and it's just basically one 6L6. It's a Class A amp and 2 preamp tubes. Of course, V1 is your most important, and this thing gives such nice tone. Well, that wraps up our preamp tube video. Hope you enjoyed it. Check out my other videos for guitar tone and tube amp information. Thank you.